had a near-death experience when I was 17. I was in high school and it was the night of my homecoming dance, and I was getting ready for the dance, and I started to feel really sick, very sick. And I was using tampons at the time, and I instinctively knew that it was toxic shock from that product. I just knew it in my body. And my mother came and picked me up from the house where I was at a friend's house, and she brought me home. And I tried to tell her that that's what I thought that I had, but she thought it was just the flu. And I was pretty sick that whole night. And I woke up the next morning and I was still sick. And my mother brought me to a clinic next to the hospital near our house where we lived. And I tried to tell the doctors at the clinic as well that it was toxic shock. And none of them believed me or thought this was true. And they sent me home with some pills, and my mother actually went out to lunch when we got back. She thought that I was doing better. But after we got back from the clinic, within an hour, I took a really drastic turn. My whole body started to shut down. And when you have toxic shock, basically all of your or the toxin in your body starts to attack, and all of your bodily functions start to shut down. So I was paralyzed from the neck down, and I was in like my body was starting to shut down. It was starting to die. And at this point, I was sort of floating above my body. I wasn't fully in my body. I was more in my spirit body than I was in my human body. And it was almost like I was watching my human body start to shut down and die. So that was an interesting experience, but I didn't feel as when the pain got really intense, that's when I shifted into my spirit body. And my little sister who was home with me, she actually ran across the street to where my mom was having lunch because she knew that I was dying and something was really wrong. And my mom got back and we drove to the hospital. And by the time we got to the hospital, like I was really shut down and I was very close to death. And when we got there, the doctor told my mom she's not going to make it. She's going to die. So go and say your goodbyes to her now. And my mom came over to the bed where I was and started to say goodbye to me. And that's the last memory I have before I fully left my body. And at that point, my body died. And I woke up in this other dimension, in this other space. I call it a divine forest because it was just this beautiful forest and it had this beautiful clearing, but it absolutely wasn't in this realm. I wasn't on planet Earth anymore. It was in a very different feeling. It had a very different vibration to it. It felt so drastically different from what our Earth experience feels like. There's no doubt about it that you are no longer on planet Earth and you're just in this completely different dimension. It's a feeling of absolute unconditional love and just, I don't know, such a feeling of relief. Like when you get back into that more natural state of being, I feel like that's much more of our natural state of being. And all of those fears and all of those body aches and all of the pains and all of that is just gone. And I started to process my human life very fast. I don't know how to explain it because it's so hard to put it into words. But I started to process my human life very fast, and I felt like I was shifting back into more of my soul self. And in front of me was a being, this light being, and she definitely had a female feel to me. And I should mention that when I was young, I was very intuitive, I was very sensitive, and I was very in touch with what I would now call spirit beings. I didn't have that term when I was young, so I just thought of them as my friends. And she was somebody that I recognized from when I was young. And so I was like, oh my gosh, you're here. And I was just so excited to see her and to be back in the other energy that felt so much like home. It feels like you're home, like you recognize that that is actually home and this is just an experience, or this is like a play, or not as real as that is. And I remember talking to this being and talking about the human life I had just left and talking about how it was much more challenging than I imagined it was going to be, and that I was having a really difficult time, and that we were discussing whether or not I was going to continue that life or not, or whether it was going to be the end of that life. And we were discussing, um, and again, it's not discussing with words, it's like an energetic exchange, and it's happening on layers and levels. It's very hard to explain. And I understood the bigger picture of why I chose this life. I understood the bigger picture of the shift in consciousness that Earth was going through and my intentions and why I wanted to be on Earth. Like all of that was known to me as I'd shifted back into my soul experience. But we were discussing whether or not I was going to go back and finish that life. And we did a review at this point, but it wasn't a life review, reviewing what had happened in my human life. It was more like looking at the probable way that my life would continue if I chose to go back and live out that life. And I don't know how to put into words what I experienced, but it's kind of like a holographic experience, and where we were looking at the overall arc of the life and the overall end result and the frequencies and the overall arc of how that life would go if I went back, and whether or not it would, whether the probability, because it was kind of like it was a mathematical breakdown is the best way I can explain it. Like everything is possible, but the probabilities based on math and energy and variables I can't even begin to understand. It was very probable that if I went back into that life, I would awaken, I would remember who I was, I would heal, I would learn how to heal myself, I would share how I did that, and I would be able to share the energies that were my soul intention. I would be able to be a part of the healing wave that is on the earth at this time. Just people that are coming to the earth who want to help heal some of the lower frequencies, the lower programming, and really just be a wave of the healing frequencies and the higher frequencies that help Earth to go through this transition in consciousness with more ease. And from a probability standpoint, it was a very high probability that if I came back into this life, that that's what would occur. So we also looked at what the impact would be if I chose not to come back into this life, like what the energetic impact would be. And, you know, people that would be impacted by that as a way to like round out whether or not I was going to make this choice or not, because it seemed clear that either I was going to go back into this particular lifetime because I hadn't done what my soul intended to do yet, or I was going to look at a different life and go back into a different lifetime and try it in that lifetime. So it's like I was giving myself all of the energetic information that I needed to have in order to make the best choice. And when we looked at the impact that leaving this life and, you know, ending that human experience would had, it was clear that my younger sister, Lori, she would have, it would be a most likely, again, it's not a definite because we have free will and we have free choice, but the probability was high that it would be a negative impact on her. And I was 17 at the time of this near-death experience, and she was 14. And at this point, my mom was very sick and she wasn't very available to us. And we were kind of taking care, you know, helping each other get through that. I was helping her, she was helping me. So it makes sense to me that she would have the most negative impact if I didn't go back. And as soon as I saw that, it's like I made the choice. I was like, oh, okay, then I'm going back, right? And that's what I did. As soon as I made that choice, I woke up in the hospital bed, and I had been in a coma for I think 4 or 5 days. And I was back. I was back in my body, and yeah, that is basically how it went down and why I made the choice to come back. I remembered it immediately when I came back, and I didn't have any context for it. I'd never heard the term near death experience. I didn't know what to make of it. And but I did remember it. I remembered that I made the choice. I felt at peace with that choice that I made, but I also started to, was that real? Did that happen? Was that a dream? I didn't talk about it with anyone because when I was young and I had a lot of access to other beings and to other realms, whenever I had talked about it when I was young, I was shut down and I was told that that was not something you should talk about, or just made to feel like that was strange or dangerous in some way. And so I was very conditioned not to talk about those kind of experiences. And this was a huge experience. And I was processing it just within myself. And I had always been very sensitive when I was a child, but I had learned over time how to shut that sensitivity down because my human self was desperate to fit in and longing for human connection. And I had created a story that I will be able to better survive in this world if I act like that's not a part of who I am, if I pretend like that's not real. So I was constantly trying to shut all of that down and trying not to have as much access to the other realms. And so when I got back, I think a part of me, my sensitivities were very alive again. I felt very connected to the other side again. I felt very intuitive, and I was always very energetically connected to the people around me, and I could always tell where people were energetically, and I was very, uh, what's the best word? Like I could always feel where people were. Like I was very connected to their emotions, to the energy around them, but it felt very heightened when I got back. And that was a little overwhelming for me because I had spent so much time trying to shut all of that down. So it was an overwhelming experience, but my body was also still trying to heal. I was very sick. I was in the hospital for many weeks. So mostly I was just trying to push it away after the initial shock of coming back and thinking about it. I just started to push the memories away and tried to integrate back into my normal human 17-year-old life. I just didn't have a lot of space to really work through it very much. And so I just tried to push it away. So I definitely didn't, I mean, I questioned a lot, like what was that? What happened? And um I would think about it and I didn't have anybody to process it with. So it was a little challenging if when I think back on it. Yeah, it was always in the back of my mind, and I would think about it a lot, but I wouldn't verbalize it or talk about it. And like I said, I struggled in many ways from that point on. I really tried to shut all of that down and tried to shut down my sensitivities and didn't really want to have so much access at that point. But I started to go down a rather destructive path. I started to drink as a way to try to help me shut that down. And I sort of learned how to disconnect as a way to try to survive in what I thought, what felt like a very overwhelming world to me. I just learned how to disconnect from my emotions, from my feelings. And I did go to college and had what looked like a normal college life, but I was drinking way too much. I was partying way too much. And I was getting more and more disconnected from my own soul and from my own self. And I was on a rather destructive path um, for many, 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 many years. And then it really reached sort of the pinnacle of self-destruction by the time I was about 31, where yeah, my life had just was just feeling so out of control. And I knew that I wasn't living according to my soul intentions. Like I knew that the way I was living my life was not the way that my soul intended to. And I really wanted to live a healthy, um, connected life, but I didn't know what that looked like because I'd spent so much time running away from who I was and how I was in these experiences. So when I was 31, I went through a divorce because my relationship with myself was so poor at that time. My relationship with others reflected that. And when I went through the divorce, that's when my life really sort of, that was like the rock bottom time for me because I started to have panic attacks. I started to have sometimes 10 to 15 panic attacks every single day. And that was such a huge wake up call for me because it was like something is desperately wrong with me. And I don't know what that is, but it was really that disconnection from my own soul and from my own heart. And this was my body's way of trying to wake me up to that and help me remember who I was and why I was here. And so during that time, I started to meditate. I found a book, a wonderful book by Louise Hay called You Can Heal Your Life. And that book was so instrumental to helping me remember who I was and helping me remember um, how I could reconnect back to myself. And I started on this path of learning how to heal myself and learning how to take care of myself. And as I started to do inner work and started to realize that I needed to deal with all this energy inside of myself and deal with these wounded inner children inside of me who were so scared and so confused. Then I started to reconnect back to myself. And then the memories from that near death experience started to come back to me. And then my connection to the spirit guides and to the other realms started to kick back in pretty fast. And that was sort of the beginning of me starting to awaken and heal and start to live more from my true self again. And to, yeah, that's when I started to think about those experiences again. And I think it was around that time, and I don't remember the exact timing of that, but YouTube didn't exist when I started to go through that awakening for myself. But I remember I found some books on people who'd had near-death experiences. Like people were starting to talk about it. I'm 54 now, and this was almost, many, many years ago. But people were starting to talk about near-death experiences. And I was obsessed with anything I could get my hands on that I could read or because it just was like, oh, that's what happened. That's my experience too. And so I was really interested in that and just felt so much comfort and so much just having the clarity and the understanding, oh, that really did happen. And oh, that makes sense. Like just sort of clicked everything into place. And then as I started to reconnect to the spirits and the spirit guides, I was able to start downloading information about it and starting to understand that from a different point of view. So it was kind of a slow unfolding, but as I started to heal myself and as I started to reconnect to myself and remember who I am, then I was finally able to process that experience. I feel like maybe the energetic I feel like when you have that kind of experience, you come back with these frequencies and this energy that you carry. But I didn't have the consciousness or the maturity yet to know how to unpack that. And so as I went through that awakening experience, then it's like all that energy started to unpack inside of me. And I started to reconnect and understand myself and start to remember some of the understandings and the clarity that I had when I was actually in that other realm. Yeah, and it gives you, I think, from a soul perspective, I really wanted to awaken in this lifetime, and I really wanted to be able to heal in this lifetime and be a part of the healing frequencies that are on the earth today. And so that experience gave me one more extra nudge in order to do that. And it was like that. It was sort of a constant, what happened? Why did that happen? And this feeling of my soul like nudging me to wake up. Like I think we all have that to a certain extent, but how much we're able to hear that and listen to that just depends on various things. But for me, that calling was pretty loud, and I think that near death experience definitely made that calling even louder. And having so much access to the other side when I was young, um, it took a fair amount of pushing down and a fair amount of pushing away and a fair amount of toxicity that I was putting into my own body and drinking myself into a coma to keep that energy down because I was always very connected, always very intuitive, and it just became so loud I couldn't ignore it anymore. And then when you reconnect back to yourself and you are living with more of your higher self in your body, when you're in that more embodied state, it feels so much better. And the contrast of not living that way was so extreme. So I was so excited as I started to finally come back to myself and live as myself and find different tools and different models that helped me heal and find different mentors and teachers that helped me really be able to understand myself and help me to be able to live from my authentic self more and more and more. And everything that I learned is everything that now I teach and everything that I share about and all the things that were really hard now, looking at like the larger arc of my life. Those challenges were exactly what my soul designed in order for me to be able to awaken and go through a process to heal and then be able to share that. So life is a lot more um, exciting and a lot more loving when you're able to see it through the eyes of your soul versus just seeing it through the eyes of your human self, especially fearful parts of your human self. When you have really fearful, wounded parts of your human self that we all do, parts that believe they're not enough, or they're not, or they're strange in some way, or they're broken in some way, which was what I thought. When you're carrying around all of these really heavy limits and burdens, and you're believing this about yourself, life is heavy and difficult. And for me, very scary, very overwhelming place to be when you're disconnected from yourself and you're believing that about yourself. It's a really difficult life. But as you start to connect back to your true self and heal those parts of yourself, life gets a lot more fun and you feel a lot more at ease with yourself and with this life. At least that's the way that I have experienced it.
Yeah.
Well, the way I understand it, there are some things obviously that are set in stone. The parents that we choose for ourselves, if you come in with certain physical limitations, that's something that we choose on the soul level, and things that we can't necessarily change, and things that we absolutely wanted to move through and experience in a certain way. But I think a lot of the other soul intentions, there's so much flexibility and there's so much of our own free will and our free choice of how we experience those things. And I feel like if we pay attention to our life and we're more conscious and we're aware of how certain scenarios are unfolding to get our attention, so that we are able to heal and deal with whatever that energy is inside of us. So let's say you don't have a lot of self-love, or you have trouble setting boundaries in your life. You might have a boss that shows up and really helps you with that, because it sort of creates a scenario where you need to stand up for yourself and you need to set a boundary, right? And so different, I think, scenarios happen in our life, and life unfolds in a way that we're able to deal with those things without it being as dramatic. But if we ignore all of the subtle ways that things show up in our life, and that spirit and life is sort of presenting us to be able to unfold these challenges and intentions we had for ourselves. For me, for example, I wanted to learn how to my intention was to be able to speak my truth, right? And to be able to speak what is true for me and speak from my heart. But when I was young and I was so overwhelmed by the energy around me, stuttering is something that came into my life. And my dad had that as well. So I clearly had the sole intention to imprint that from him and then find a way to work through that within myself. And as life kept presenting me with opportunities to work with that, for a long time, I resisted it, and it became more and more challenging for me. And it felt like a curse, right? But as I awakened, I started to say, okay, this is happening for me. I trust life. I trust that if this challenge is in my life and this stutter is in my life, there's a reason it's here. And how can I look at this through a different lens? And how can I see this as a gift? And I started to realize I would stutter when certain energies were around me, energies that felt very closed, energies where parts of myself would feel very unsafe. So I had to learn how to work with those energies inside me and those parts inside me, those inner children inside of me, to create inner safety within me. Because when I'm speaking from my authentic self, I don't have any issues at all. But when that part of me would take over and rise up in me, that's when I would struggle. But when I started to look at it from a different point of view, then I was able to create a change in my life and learn how to speak with more ease and speak my truth, right? But if I had ignored that, then more and more circumstances, I think, would have come along that would have become more and more dramatic in order to get my attention, in order to show me that I hadn't yet followed through with the intention. So I think it's more flexible along those lines. And I think our free will we have so many choices and so many possible ways things could unfold. And I feel like the possibility and probability of how things will unfold in our lives, it's like an infinite number of ways that things could unfold. So I think it's much more flexible than we're aware of. But if we are allowing life to show us what we need to heal inside of us and where we are needing to grow and where we are needing to step more into our authentic self and just paying attention to our life, then it doesn't become as dramatic. For me, I was shutting down myself and shutting down my intuition and shutting down all of the guidance I was receiving a lot in that earlier part of my life. And so it needed to get pretty dramatic. I had to get to the point of 15 panic attacks before I started to pay attention, right? So that's an example of a dramatic occurrence. But even that, even um, an illness or panic attacks or whatever the thing is, like I honestly believe that if you have the challenge in your life, there's a positive reason is happening for you, and you can use every challenge to help you grow and evolve and live more from your authentic self. And that if the challenge is happening, I started to take on the belief that I must have the power and the capability to handle this, or it wouldn't be in my life. So with the speech, for example, I used to always disempower myself and think that it made me weak and I'm so stupid and why am I like this, and just disempower myself around it and just bring myself down. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, if it's in my life, I must be able to handle this. I must have the resources to understand this. I can figure this out. So I think that's really helpful to think of as well. And then you're flowing with your soul intentions and you're living life in a way that your soul and you are working as a team. And it's like you start to have a lot more synchronicities, and you start to trust life a lot more, and you start to trust yourself a lot more, and you get into that more flowy place. I think Louise Hay, I can really credit her to helping me move out of like victim consciousness with that, because I definitely was in more of a victim state with that. And the more that I was able to empower myself around that and start to see it as a gift and also see it with compassion, right? It was never about, I may stutter again in my life, or when I do stutter, when I'm having a difficulty, instead of being the worst person to myself and being critical of myself and being so mean to myself, I learned how to have compassion for myself and how to treat myself with love, and to be like, okay, you had a hard day, you didn't do very well speaking today, but that's okay. You're lovable exactly the way that you are. So it really set me on a journey of self-love. It really helped me to love myself. And I had lots of challenges in my life. I needed to learn how to bring compassion to each of those because I was so hard on myself. Like, why, why did I drink so much, and why was I so self-destructive for myself for so long? I had issues. I would undereat and I would overeat, and I was in this binge eating cycle for many years. So I had all these challenges that I used to be incredibly hard on myself about. And I learned how to bring compassion to each of those. And when you have compassion for yourself and you learn how to be your own best friend and you learn how to have your back, taking responsibility for the things that you do wrong, or things that you want to act in a different way, life, you just feel so much more supported. You feel you're living a life where you're supporting yourself instead of tearing yourself down. And I had really learned how to tear myself down and how to make myself wrong and how to just make myself less than. And the more that I came back into my heart and came back into myself and forgave myself, and I was, leaned into all the challenges in my life and said, okay, well, what can I learn from this? What is this showing me? What is this teaching me? And how can I show up for myself in a different way? And how can I become more conscious through this? It just changed everything, because then I didn't feel like a victim in my life. I felt like I had taken my power back and taken the control back in my life. I don't have control over what anybody else does. I don't have control over a lot of things on the external, but I always have control over how I treat myself. I have control over how I meet the parts of myself that feel angry or feel jealous or feel out of control or feel sad or feel less than. And when I was able to step back into the energy of my higher self and become the parent to all these different parts of myself, that's really what loving yourself is about, because it's not disowning these parts of yourself that are angry or sad or whatever they may be. It's really bringing love to all of them and learning how to integrate all of them so that you feel so much more empowered and you feel so much better about yourself and your life. I think it's self-healing, right? If we want to live in a world with more peace, more love, more compassion, all of these things, if we want to live in a world that sort of reflects those higher possibilities, then we have to do that for ourselves. We have to be able to do exactly what I was talking about, bring compassion to ourselves and learn how to heal ourselves and learn how to love ourselves and understand ourselves. And so the desire to want to heal and understand myself was how that manifested in me, like that desire to heal and to create a life that felt better to me and felt healthy to me, and where I had clarity and understanding and where I was connected to my soul. That desire was very strong. And that desire was sort of that soul intention allowing itself to be created through me. Because you can't help anybody else if you don't help yourself first and you don't learn how to live. I mean, becoming the living example of that, I think, is the best thing that I can do. So for me, it was all about that. It's about a journey of self-love and then sharing, which I have done now, which is sharing, here's how I was able to heal my relationship with food. And here's how I was able to create a more self-loving relationship with myself. And so learning how to do it myself and then sharing it, empowering other people to do the same, and reminding them that the answers are inside of them, that the same, that the wisdom and the knowledge and the answers that they are seeking are inside of themselves. And instead of disempowering yourself, learning how to live from a more empowered place. So that is, I feel, how that manifested and was created through me. And I'm always in a process of that. Whatever I'm going through in my life, I'm always like, okay, this is the path. This is how I am able to be a living example of that, by bringing compassion and forgiveness when I make mistakes, and bringing those frequencies through how I live my life, and then sharing that in a way that feels holistic and empowering. I think, there's so many YouTube channels now that are sharing NDEs and talking about NDEs, and I love them and I love watching them. And I'm very connected to the guidance inside of me now, and my spirit guides, same way they nudged me to heal and to look at all of, the challenges I was having through a different lens. They started to nudge me to share this story. They started to say, you have a story that you could share. And I've had to work with some of the energies, things that got activated inside of me as I started to think about that. I've had a fear of being persecuted, or a fear of being thought of as strange, or talking about the other side and talking about spirit guides and all of this. And so it's sort of the next step for me, I think, being able to share it and to integrate whatever energy comes up as I start to share it, and just giving myself the freedom to sort of step into that role where I can share it. And yeah, it's seeing so many people sharing them now is just amazing, because again, YouTube didn't even exist when I started on this path, and now it's just wild to see how many videos are out there with people sharing their stories. So that was very encouraging as well. But it was like that inner nudge, that inner knowing that this is what I was meant to do next. And then as I took that step, as I had the courage to deal with the fears that came up, as I considered that, which I've done, I've looked at the different parts of me that were afraid of sharing it, the different parts of me that were afraid of betraying people that I loved if I shared it, because maybe my mom wouldn't want me sharing that she wasn't doing very well. Like, dealing with all the energies that came up as I stepped into sharing it. That's been a very healing experience for me, allowing me to heal those parts of myself. And then it's also opened the door to new ideas and new downloads and new things that I possibly want to share in the world. Some ideas have been coming through in terms of helping people reconnect, and how they get messages from within themselves, and how to connect to spirit, and how to connect back to themselves, and also ideas about what happens after we die. My guides have shared sort of a framework of what happens after we die, to give our minds a way to start to process what happens after we die. It's not really death, it's a transition into another realm. And so some of these new ideas are starting to come to me as I start to step onto this path and start to share. So it's sort of like the next step. I've been online. I started sharing I started a personal brand over 10 years ago, and I've worked with thousands of clients, helping them with their challenges with food and body and self, and learning about self-love and teaching about self-love, and using the model that I love so much, the internal family systems model, which is really about parts work and understanding the different parts of yourself. And so I've been doing that for a while. And it's the most grounded, spiritual, psycho-spiritual model I have found, and I love it. So it's sort of like it allows me to continue to heal, and it allows me to share what's coming through. So I think it's sort of just the next step on this path, me feeling safe enough to share it, and me feeling confident enough to put myself out there on larger platforms, knowing that there's going to be people that don't agree with me. It's me speaking my truth, right? I've trusted that with the work I've done with clients, and it feels like the right clients and the right type of people, and exactly the kind of people that I, through my own experiences, are best able to serve. They always show up in my world, and it's been like this beautiful co-creation. And I trust the larger divine plan to flow those right people to me at the right time. And so I'm leaning into that with this experience as well, and saying, okay, well, the right people who need to watch this, who are going to get something out of this, who my experience is going to help them in some way, then I'm just trusting that unfolding and helping the parts of me that still feel very nervous about speaking in larger platforms. Like, I have a website, but I don't have a lot of outer facing videos. And so, I do all of my inner work even before I do an interview like this. I let those parts of me know, hey, let me do you're safe if you will let me do the speaking, and sort of help those parts feel more relaxed as I bring myself out in this more public way, talking about these types of things. But yeah, I sort of trust in the divine plan in all of that. If my guides and the divine is nudging me to share this, then I have to trust that there's a good reason for that, for my own growth, and also to be of service too.
No,
I'll go through like 6 steps after dying. I will just share what the guides have shared with me and kind of give an overview of these steps. And they're not meant to be, it's not always in this step-by-step fashion. You might go into one phase before the next phase, but it gives you a general idea and a way to just understand what it's like. So step number one, they call the crossing. And that's the time when your body actually, when the soul leaves the physical body and begins to pass into beyond the veil. And that's what I experienced when I was starting to float above my body, when my body was starting to shut down. And for some of us, this is a very peaceful experience, but for some, depending on what they're going through, there may be some confusion at this time. But it's like your guides are always there to gently bring you back in and to help you cross in the most peaceful way. And then step two, they call the gathering. And this is basically where your guides, your ancestors, the people that you have walked with in many lives and light beings, where they all come forth. And it's sort of like a time where everybody gathers and you remember that you're never alone and you've never been alone. And it's that moment of sort of homecoming, and homecoming with all of these beings that you have walked many lives with and that you know very, very well. And then the review is the third step. And this is basically a compassionate reflection of the life that you have just lived, or in my case, the life that you are going to live. But for most, you're reviewing the life that you've just lived and seeing it through the lens of growth, intention, and impact. So it's not a judgmental review at all, as many people who share near-death experiences talk about. It's not, there's no judgment at all, but rather a witnessing, a soulful witnessing of the life that you've lived, and where the soul sees what it learns, how it gave, how it received love, and also what still feels unresolved within you. So it's all seen through love and never through punishment. It's always about, how did we learn? How did we grow? And then step number four, they call the resting. And this is sort of an integration phase. And some people may go to the resting or this healing space first, depending on what they've experienced in their life. But this integration phase is sort of where the soul recalibrates and really just, integrates all that it's learned. And it could be, there's healing temples there or dreamlike realms. It really depends. Our ability to create this is like an infinite number of ways this could be created. Nothing is set in stone or looks a certain way, but the resting or the healing phase where you are given time to integrate all that you've gone through. And then number 5, they call the exploring. And the exploring is where the soul expands into other realms, other dimensions, or on other learning paths. And at this point, they may meet with other beings, explore different things, study different things, do things that you love, right? This is really a time of soul expansion. You get curious and you just can do so many different things in the other realm beyond what we're able to understand here. But it's really a time to explore. And then number 6 is what they call the unfolding. And this is when the soul chooses its next expression of service. And this could be a chance to come again into a body and live again, either in this planet or somewhere else. Maybe you're going to live as a spirit guide next. Maybe you're going to merge with a collective, or perhaps you're going to remain in the light or seed a new dimension of consciousness somewhere else. Like the possibility of how it unfolds is limitless, and it's always a sovereign choice that's guided by love and clarity, and your guides and different beings that you've been involved with are a part of that. So that is the 6 steps as they have presented them to me, and I haven't really started to dive too deep into it yet, but I think it's nice. It gives the mind a way to understand what comes next, and just gives a framework that helps us to understand the unknown or be a little bit less nervous about the unknown. It's just the unfolding of life and the eternal sense of your being. But it's fun and it's expansive, and once you're on the other side, yeah, the fun of it all and the excitement of it all and the opportunity that coming to Earth affords us in terms of the growth, it's so huge. Like Earth is such a amazing place where souls can grow and expand in very fast ways. And it's, even though it's hard to believe sometimes when you're living a human life, my understanding is that if you're here in a body, it's a very unique experience that many souls want to have because of the level of expansion and growth and service that you can have here. So it helps you get really excited about your life again when you know that, like, this is such a unique, interesting experience that the soul really wants to have. And even though it's a very contrasting experience, and you've got low frequencies and high frequencies and everything in between, for an eternal soul, it's so interesting. And there's a lot going on galactically and cosmically, and it's so much more than we can imagine, but it's also an exciting opportunity. And the more that you are anchored in your soul, the more you remember that, and the more you're excited to be here and to make the most of this experience. I love the idea of playing with that idea. Like, what if life is on my side, right? What if everything is happening for me? What if there's these amazing experiences that I can't even imagine right now that are going to unfold for me? Like, what if life could be super fun? What if I did things with the assumption that life is for me? There's a famous Einstein quote that I'm wanting to say, but I can't remember it. But it's like, either, do you know the one I'm talking about? Like, either you believe that life is your enemy or your friend, and whatever one does that make sense? Do you know that one? I have to look it up now. Like, hold on. Oh, there are only 2 ways to live your life. Okay, there are only 2 ways to live your life. One, as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. So it's that idea that either everything is a miracle or everything is not. But the more you take on the miracle mindset, I think the more life flows. So yeah, I love those ideas. Appreciating the small things, and you're savoring the moments that you have. And I think that's the other thing that discussing death can do for us, because if we thought tomorrow was our last day on earth, if we knew it was our last day on earth, we would live with so much more appreciation and joy and savoring the moments that we do have, because we would be looking at things through an entirely different lens. And so I love that. I love how you're really appreciating those small things and making the most out of the moments that you do have. I think I try and do the exact same thing. And appreciation is a really powerful frequency to be in, being able to appreciate the small things and also even appreciate the challenges. Like I now know, okay, if I have a challenge, I know there's a good reason for this, and I know I'm going to learn and grow through this. So, even having appreciation for the challenges in my life, too. So, it's a powerful place to be for sure.
Oh,
I have a website, heatherkjones.com, and that would be the best